All right, guys, we are here with Tommy Crews, and he is the number 6 child of LD and Gardis Crews, and he is my daddy's brother, Hewlin's brother, Tommy. And again, I'm Scott Crews, and we are going to go through and talk a little bit about the life and times of LD and Gardis and Tommy, as he recalls it, so that you, the future viewers, can see and hear exactly what Tommy's got to say about it. So with that, we're going to get started. Tommy, thank you for being here with me. We're going to start out by understanding what is your full name as it is on the birth certificate.
Birth certificate will show you that I am Thomas Luther Crews.
Thomas Luther Crews.
And the Thomas came from my dad's cousin, Tom Ward. Goes way back. So I am legally, I'm legally Thomas Luther Crews.
Do you know where the Luther came from?
T.L. Ward, and T.L. is the Thomas that I've just mentioned. Thomas, he was Thomas Luther as well. My dad's family had a lot to do with naming us kids, and Mom finally got a couple of the girls named after her side of the family. So I was number 6 out of the 8, and as Scott said before, so that's where my name came from. It originated from Dad's cousin.
Cool. That's exactly what I was going to ask you, my next question. So when and where were you actually born? When and where?
I came into the world June the 2nd, 1947. And if I'm not bad wrong, up on Crews Crossroads, which is on Highway 2, somewhat east of Barry's Crossroads. All the crossroads were named by family crossings back then. At Miller's Crossroads, Carroll Crossroads, Crews Crossroads, Miller's Crossroads.
Good gosh.
So there you go with that. But if I'm not bad wrong, I spent my early days at the Crews Crossroads. Then we moved south of Barry's Crossroads on Highway now 179 to a place called the old Bob King place, which is another family area. But most of my younger days were spent there, and then obviously we moved from there on down further south where we are now. I'm the only child left on the old home place north of Harris Chapel Church, of which my granddaddy Barnes pastored for several years.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
I helped dig the foundation to that church, as a matter of fact.
Matter of fact, your oldest sister just told us that same story.
There you go.
That y'all kids actually dug the original foundation of that church, and we'll show you guys that in a little bit. Yeah. So, do you remember? And these are recollections that I'm getting from all you kids of LD and Gardis. Do you remember ever hearing a story of how LD and Gardis actually how they met?
I believe they met up on Highway 2 again at it was Crews Crossroads, and I think my granddaddy Barnes was pastoring. Actually, it was at a brush arbor, and for the newer generations, you literally took brushes and made 4 corners, and you propped brushes up around it, and you had bench seats, and he was holding a revival, and if I'm not bad wrong, that's where my dad and my mom met, and that was my dad's second wife, my mom. And his first wife, Irene Curry, passed shortly after giving birth to their only child. Ann, Dad and Mom got married, and very shortly thereafter, they had our oldest sister, Frances.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what we heard from Frances, was about a brush arbor. Now, I'm glad you explained that, because basically they just stood up a makeshift church out in the middle of wherever, and they would take all these tree limbs and stuff and put them up over it to have a roof over it, and they called it a brush arbor.
Transportation was limited to a mule and wagon, so it was not unusual to see. It was not unusual to see brush arbors popped up at a lot of dirt road intersections. We had no highway. No highway. So my papa Barnes, before he became a full-fledged pastor, he was a traveling minister. Wherever they needed a fill-in, Papa Barnes would go and take the old mule and wagon and go and he'd fill in for whoever was out from that particular church and carry on the service.
Now, from what I've gathered, LD was probably a pretty old rough feller back in the day, and pretty tough old feller. And for him to go court Gardis, that had to he had to probably get into the church somehow to do that, didn't he?
Yeah, Dad was a tough guy when it come to family. Obviously, later on in the years, we found out that he could be pretty tough. I don't know how he humbled himself from his background to actually date a pastor's daughter, but he obviously did a good job of it. Won her heart, and I had a great, fantastic mom. My.
Yeah,
Putting up with LD Crews. Yeah. You had to have. She was a gritty old person.
Yeah, we'll get into her in a little bit. I got some stuff on her.
Yeah.
But, well, talk to me a little bit, Tommy, about your because remembering things, at the age of 3 and 4 is kind of tough, but from about the age of 6 to 12, you can probably remember some stuff. Talk to me a little bit about what you remembered around that age right there, about coming up out here on the farm. And by that time we were at Bob King place, and then we had moved down here to what I would call the Gritney farm, or so forth, where LD had bought about 180 acres of property.
Yep.
About that time, talk to me just about little things that come up on you that
Sure.
that stand out.
Sure. Well, first off, the generation that we're going to be talking to that views this film will know I'm 77.
77.
I'm 5 months short of 78. So everything was done by hand back then, and you plowed a mule. I plowed a mule. Dad's crops was corn, and we had some cotton, and then we had watermelons. And so it was our deal every year that we pretty much repeated those crops. And again, it was all done by hand for several years. And I personally plowed a mule and this type of thing. And later on, we got the tractor, and I'll tell the story that I don't know who was happiest to see that tractor, us or the mule. So we took a lot of pressure off the old mule. We had one mule, and that was the case with a lot of the farmers. Well, Dad and our family was fortunate enough to have more acreage than the normal person. And again, later on, as you said, he acquired some more acreage, and thereby we needed a tractor, and we got the tractor. I well remember seeing that tractor coming down the dirt road. It was a beautiful sight. And your dad was one of the ones, he was third in the family, so 2 girls ahead of him, and Francis learned how to plow as good as any one of the men.
Yeah.
But it was hard work. You pick cotton, obviously, back then, that's 60 years ago. From this day, it was all by hand. You didn't see any cotton pickers. You didn't see any
combines.
You didn't see any combines. All pulled by hand. The mule and wagon. You pull the mule and wagon out in the cornfield, and when you pull a sack full of corn, you went and dumped it in the wagon. The wagon got full. You went and dumped it in the barn. We were fortunate that we had a pretty good amount of livestock. About 300 head of hogs at one time. No stock law, meaning that your hogs could go outside of no fence whatsoever. And we had I remember there 2 or 3 years in a row, we had like 60 head of cows. So you walk in a yard back then, it was first thing you recognized, it was automatic to see chickens running everywhere. Well, there was your Sunday meal right there.
Uh-huh.
And then anywhere running around outside of that was the hogs. And we would crossbreed some of the domesticated hogs into the wild hogs and really get some good tasting pork, and so there's where a lot of your meat come from. Dad was a great hunter and a great fisherman. We lived off the ground here, if you will, for several years. Just a simple fact of how good, as we grew up, we became as fishing and hunting and that type of thing. So we had plenty to eat. Later on in the years, I was a teenager. We had like 5 acres of sugar cane.
Yeah.
Thereby, that's where we made our syrup. And this time of the year, this particular time of the year, is how we made it through our winter months, because you didn't have any crops other than the cane. So Dad was he's a pretty good businessman when it comes to something like that, and we'd make 12 to 1,500 gallons of syrup every winter.
12 to 1,500.
12 to 1,500 gallons, and a big gallon jug, glass jug, was about $3 a gallon. So you multiply that times 1,500, and that would get you through the winter months. And then of course you had the hogs that you could kill anytime you wanted to. So
was that working that cane hard work?
Very hard work. My brother and I, Clifton, he's 16 months older than I. It was our job to get up every morning. It would usually be about the second week into maybe the third week into November, and it would bleed over into about the second or third week into December. So it was our job to get up and grind the cane. And we didn't have the mule. Daddy got that tractor, and we put a PTO drive on it, belt driven. And you couldn't feed that cane fast enough through there to, you always had plenty of room to put the cane. It was our job to fill the vat, if you will, full of cane juice where Dad could start cooking, and also had the trough right up under the mill. So before the school bus run, we had to have those two things full.
Good.
And it was hard work.
Yeah.
A lot of it was frosty mornings, and it was very, very cold, hard work. But thank God it didn't last but about 3 weeks.
And what I heard is that sometimes that cane, or that syrup, would make its way all the way to Birmingham, from what I was told.
Dad got his name recognized very quick. So he went and ordered from the local hardware, Bowen Hardware in Bonifay, the cans, and you could get the half gallon or you could get the gallon. So I well remember people coming in, and Clifton and I having to load those cane, the syrup buckets. They put them in a big box, and they'd leave here, and there's no telling where they ended up.
Yeah,
but Dad had a good name for making syrup.
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
sure did.
Well, that was some tough times, but I know we got through it. But
build character.
Yeah, build some character.
Yes, sir. It sure did. Responsibility.
Yeah. Now, where did you wind up going to school?
Graduated from Bethlehem, which is Bethlehem High School, which is over on Route 177, north of Bonifay, 10 miles or so. Graduated in '66, and
1966.
Yeah, 1966. And I was a basketball player. I well remember our senior year. We went undefeated. Only even till now, the only team in the county that has had an undefeated season, and we're also the only team, the school in the county, that's never won a state title. And but the one little school east of us called Poplar Springs, over somewhat west of Graceville, Florida, we beat them 4 times one year, and they ended up winning the state championship in another class. But but anyway, we missed state by 3 points. And there's been a lot of discussions down through the years about this and that. But
and you had a good coach.
Had a great coach, Coach T.E. Siggers. Thomas Siggers was a great coach. Totally, he didn't have to demand respect. You just automatically felt like he deserved it.
Right.
And that is a lot. It's helped me. He was, matter of fact, when I came back from Vietnam, I served in the Army from '67 to 1967, 1970, and Vietnam was a year's tour, and then he was the first place outside of family that I stopped to say hello to, and we sat there and cried. And then when my dad passed, I asked him if I could adopt him as my father, and of course we had a great chat. But he and Miss Betty, and we've just buried Miss Betty about 2 weeks ago. Coach left us. Yeah. Coach left us 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Now the funny thing about T.E. Siggers is not only was he your basketball coach and a mentor back then. I graduated Holmes County High School in 1986, and his youngest daughter, Malia Siggers, and I graduated high school together.
Yeah.
So that's how. So he was definitely populating the earth.
He was. He had just a fantastic family. And right quick, like I'll share this as a memory. He came down from North Alabama, Arab, Alabama, in 1954, and that made me 7 years old. And he found out that my dad could fly fish, and he found out about all these lakes. And back then he had a Jeep, and my granddaddy Barnes, that was previously mentioned, the pastor, carried him into the river. They walked to the river and caught a bunch of jackfish. And I remember Coach Siggers telling me, he said, you know, we got back out to the house, and he said, his wife, we got them things cleaned up. And he said, there's a platter of them like that. And he said, that man took his hat off and put it on a chair, and he said, I didn't think he'd ever get to praying and thanking God for what he done. But Coach Siggers found out right quick like that he had moved to a great area. And unbeknownst to us until later on in the years, he had gone all the way down into Central Florida trying to find a place that he could call home and start his family. But he and Miss Betty, when you mentioned Coach Siggers, that was just a great name.
Respect.
Very, very respectful family, and still are, even though Miss Betty has just left us.
Yeah. Well, do you have any recollection of LD and Gardis's education? That they had. What was your recollection of that?
It's my understanding, and I think we're going to visit the school that's been converted into a church. You and I think, are going to visit that a little bit later today. I think Dad was like the third grade, and Mom was like maybe the second or third. But Dad's first wife helped teach him how to read, and that's what he was able to turn that into an asset, adding to his education. And even later on in years was elected commissioner here in Holmes County in the late 50s.
Yeah.
So our family was I've got a brother that served commissioner, and then I got another brother that served as school board member. So the only reason your dad and I wasn't asked to run is because we was probably wanted by the law.
Yeah, they had too much on you.
They already knew all they needed to know about it, and of course that's a joke. But it's he and I share that joke all so often.
Yeah. What talking back about high school and going to school out at Bethlehem, I know some of the older kids, Francis, Christine, Hewlin, I know they went to Boniface some.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most of the later ones all graduated and went to Bethlehem. But you mentioned Coach Siggers was a big influence on you. What other fun, crazy stuff went on out at Bethlehem that you remember that you would want to share with some of the, I don't know where this will be viewed if it's 100 years from now, but something you'd want some of our lineage to see.
Well, unlike now, with all the, got to be careful what I say here.
Yeah.
But, I won't be around for them to come arrest me. So, but anyway, back then, drinking a beer was the highlight of a weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you sneak away. And Coach Siggers, he didn't want to hear that. If you had anything to do with sports, that's one thing you didn't go outside of his bounds as far as taking care of yourself physically. So, but I don't know, just getting out and having a great time, and as I think I shared earlier off camera that we had a couple of guys in the community right quick, like one had a Plymouth or a Dodge Barracuda. That was not a fish, that was an automobile. And one of my classmates had a 1966 brand new Chevelle 396 engine, and they would get tanked up a little bit, meaning they would sip a little wine and whatever was available. And they'd run at a highway and turn the car sideways and try to prop it up on its side. So stuff like that, just foolishness. And I really can't think of any games that we would play on one another, but we were our generation, and I don't mean this to sound derogatory, but our generation, I think, was raised right. We obviously are renowned as the baby boomers, if you will. Again, me being born in 47, shortly after the war, and there's a lot of us that's my age right now that we know what we mean when we say baby boomer.
Right. Well, I know we've touched on a lot about growing up out here in Gritney on the farm, how the hard work was with doing the cane, doing the cotton, and all that stuff by hand. And I know that was some good character building, as you called it,
Sure
times
was.
there. But you know, after kind of growing up, you said you graduated Bethlehem what year?
1966.
1966.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first left home? And when that was, and what was that like? What was going on with you?
Yes, I remember it well. My older brother, Hewlin, which is your dad, and then the brother that's 16 months younger than I, they were both in service, and that left me here with Dad on the farm. And those two guys gone, Dad had to hire some help. So I was on the draft, and they called that, then your military had a draft back then. You had to sign up when you turned, I think, 18 maybe. So kind of a short story of that is I was in the pup woods, which means you're cutting wood for pup. And I remember working on a Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, I got on a Greyhound bus in Bonifay, and I ended up in Montgomery, Alabama, inducted into the United States Army. So I didn't have a summer break, and of course that left Dad here with the hired help. But yeah, we it was pretty fast back then. Of course, the war was going on full time, and there was over 56,000 guys and gals lost their life in the Vietnam War. So they had to be replaced pretty quick. And you take a guy off the farm that has had a gun in his hand before is totally different than kids coming from the communities of we call them cement cities.
Mm-hmm.
Never held a gun, and our government sends them to an 8-week training course and drops them off in a foreign country and expects them to survive. So
yeah,
pretty tough.
Pretty tough. And
Yeah.
that was first time you actually left the farm.
That's exactly right. I had as a matter of fact, one quick trip hauling watermelons to a place up in Birmingham, Alabama. Daddy let me actually ride with your dad. He was driving our truck, and we'd haul watermelons up there to sell it. They're big. They had a big market. We could get good money for them.
Yeah,
But as far as leaving the country, that was in November of 1967 when I was in the military.
And that was delivering those watermelons to Birmingham. That was over on Finley Avenue.
Finley Avenue, remember it well. Yeah,
Finley.
great market. And we had a family friend that knew the ins and outs. And Hewlin and I, your dad and I got to ride along, and that was an experience for me. I'd never been. We'd always been here on the farm, and Dad would farm us out, if you will. We would get through with our crops, and some of the people up the way here, 10 miles away, we would go up and help them gather their crops, and that's how we'd pay for our school clothes and shoes and stuff.
Yeah.
So help Mom and Dad out there with the budget, if you will.
Well, even all the way up into I graduated high school in '86. Even up to 82, 83, 1982, 83, 84. I mean, I followed in y'all's footsteps and worked for A.E. Buddy Ward up the road here.
Yep. Trucking firm.
And I was hauling watermelons for him up to Finley Avenue, and that's how I knew Finley Avenue very well. And Daddy's advice to me was, when you get on Finley Avenue, you don't stop till you get to the farmer's market.
That's exactly
and
right.
He said, hopefully you don't have to stop at a red light, because somebody's going to jump on the side of the truck and steal some of your watermelons.
They'd run on the sidewalk there. You had one particular hill up there that we had to go over, and it was a heck of a hill, we called it. It was more like a mountain, but there would be some kids along there, and when you geared down about first gear, they wanted to jump up on the truck and throw the 8 or 10 millions off to the guys on the sidewalk, and you couldn't stop because you couldn't get started again. It was such an incline.
Hill, such an incline.
But they had that figured out good.
Golly,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
But that's part of life. I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah. I'm just glad that I actually got to kind of experience a taste of what y'all did, just so I could say, I did.
Yeah.
I did. It's a little bit different time.
Your younger days before you could actually physically fill in and do a man's job, well, you were able to witness this by eyesight. You could see it, and then obviously you could hear it, and it's like, then when you fell into it, you say, well, now I know what they were going through.
Yeah.
So, but
well, what growing up out here, what would you describe kind of shortly of how did how did growing up out here under LD and Gardis's guidance and rules and whatever, how did that prepare you, you think, for having a successful life? Because we'll get into that in a little bit, because you have.
I have. Very, very blessed in simple senses. Back then, you just respected your elders. You didn't ask a lot of questions. Obviously, well, I say obviously, our dad, you never asked Dad why.
Yeah.
Or what. You know, you need to be paying attention. It taught you respect, and I think that goes, it still does today. But there's a lot of it missing because of obvious different reasons, and won't go into that. But
Yeah.
it built good character, and you learn that hard work won't kill you.
Right.
It'll wear you out.
It'll make you sleep.
It'll make you go to bed early, and you try to sleep late. But on the farm, you never could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But Mom and Dad not having an education through either one of them, graduated 8 kids from school, and that says a lot. And I could have gotten a partial scholarship, athletic scholarship, basketball, but Dad needed me here on the farm, and I could tell just by his body language that, man, I'd love to see you go to college, but what am I going to do here, you know, on the farm? So,
Yeah.
It ended up that set me going forward in my career. Later on in the years, obviously, that all I had to do was have respect and show honesty.
Yeah. That's I like that. What now you went off to Vietnam, did a little time over there, and came back, and somewhere along the line, I don't know when, you can tell me and tell us when, you met some little old gal over there close to Westville area or somewhere. Tell us about how'd that go about?
I'll do that. There's a little community west of Barry's Crossroads. You cross the river, Choctawhatchee River, in a little place called New Hope. And her family, they were sharecroppers. They never owned anything. They always worked for the other fella. And people say, well, how do you do that? Well, he pays you in groceries and stuff of that nature, gives you a place to live. So this sweet little old girl named Linda Marie Stewart, her elementary school only went to the 6th grade. Of course, Bethlehem was a 12-year school. So when she left New Hope and came over to our, as we called it, our big school, she and I crossed paths, and I ended up being a basketball player, and she was a cheerleader a year behind me. So she graduated in '67, and we dated, and we had a real good understanding of each other, knowing that we both come from hard-working families, and we didn't really expect a tremendous amount out of life. It's just that we just kind of hit it off and started dating, and before you know it, Vietnam came into effect. She really wanted to get married before I went over, and I just simply told her, the way they're killing them over there, you're too young to be a widow. So we postponed our wedding, and 2 years after I come back in '69, July the 18th, we were married and got 2 kids. And Jessica, our daughter, was the first one, and then Cage, which is Thomas Stewart. We did a little wordplay in there on the Stewart part, S-T-U-A-R-T, and instead of her last name, S-T-E-W-A-R-T. So, and I gave him my great granddaddy, or my granddaddy's nickname, Cage, spelled K-A-E-G-E, and that's what we refer to him as. So, Lynn and I, we met in school and hung in there, and if we can make it to another July the 18th in 2025, we'll have 56 years together.
56 years. Y'all hearing that? That's probably a long time for folks watching this.
Exactly.
100 years from now.
Exactly. And she's a sweet lady. I owe her everything. I owe everything to her.
Yeah. Y'all got married. What year was that again?
1969.
1969. Got married. Now I know you did a lot of time, from what all I remember, in the timber industry,
building products.
So you were. Tell me just a little bit about what you mainly did that got you where you're at right now.
Right quick, like what got me in the gate there was that growing up on the farm again, Daddy not only farmed, but we logged. We had part-time logging, and our friends and neighbors recognized the working ethics that we had that Mom and Dad had given us. And I had a real good friend, Mr. Gilmore, Gaston Gilmore, came to me and asked me, did I feel like I could, tear away from the farm, if you will, and go to work with him. But just prior to that, I went to work with the international paper building roads. And then after that, they recognized my work ethics and had a job foreman opportunity. And Mr. Gilmore gave me the opportunity to take it, and I took it. And 38-year career in the building industry. 34 of those were spent in management. So I can tell you what a 2 before should look like. And I had a lot. I worked all up the East Coast, Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, and managed a engineered fuel pellet plant in West Virginia. And that's simply fuel pellets that's made 100% from sawdust out of hardwood, and they use it for heating purposes.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that. That was a manager's job that I really enjoyed, and I did the rest of them. Mm-hmm. But growing up on the farm and being able to transfer from what we call the logging, the physical part here, I was recognized as someone, I guess, capable of being able to work people.
Yeah.
The skills that that Mom and Dad had taught us to get along. You got to eventually an 8-member family, so you got to get along.
You got to get along because y'all slept pretty close together.
Yes,
right?
Yes, sir. I slept at the foot of the bed many a night. As a matter of fact, it was your dad, my sister Marie, who passed in 1976, and then my older 16-year-older brother Clifton. They got to lay like you normally lay in a bed, and I was at the foot of the bed for several years.
I can remember y'all growing up with Gardis Crews.
Yeah.
I can remember Daddy dropping me off in the morning for her to help me get on the bus to go to school, and talking about sleeping in the bed. Her and LD slept in different beds, but the beds were in the same room.
Yeah.
And so I'd go crawl in bed with Granny in the mornings.
Remember it well.
And I always had bad circulation, and my feet was always cold. And so she'd take and boil water and put it in a milk jug and put that milk jug at the end of the bed with my feet to keep my feet warm.
With us, it was bricks. We had a fireplace that serviced the kitchen. The old mom's stove for a long time was wood, wood burning, and then on the off side of that was the living room. And Mom you could take 3 bricks, and what we call a croaker sack, which people that's viewing this down the years will never know, but it's a sack that feed or whatever would come in, and she would take 3 of those bricks and roll that sack up and lay it in front of the fireplace and bring it in there and put it on the bed with us. And that's how we didn't have heat. We just had that fireplace.
One fireplace,
and it was like a 2-bedroom house is what it was. Mom and Dad's bed was in the living room, if you will, and therefore that's where the fireplace was.
Golly.
So we knew what sleeping close was all about.
There it is.
No insulation in the houses, old wood frame houses.
Yep. Frances told us a little bit earlier in her interview. She was talking to us about the old bungalow down here, which is, I think, maybe still standing.
Still existing.
It's still existing.
Yep.
I'll go get a little shot of that, what I can. But that y'all had moved into that, and she said whenever Granddaddy, LD, was a county commissioner, he was instrumental in getting the dirt road paved.
Highway 179.
And they, at that time, the bungalow was too close to the road, and we had to move the house back. And I was telling our future folks viewing this is that those houses weren't built on a cement slab. They were built up on timber, and so you could literally put something under it, jack it up, and move it backwards. But there was a lot of ways you could see the dirt underneath the floor.
Oh yeah, there was no insulation at all in the house. All it was wood, and only insulation I remember is later on in the years. The houses back then just didn't have insulation. And the planks, if you put the planks up before they were cured, they would shrink. And, Might sound strange to our listeners, but you could actually see chickens through the floor.
When the chickens would go under the house.
Well, when you swept the floor off the kitchen, if anything from the table fell on the floor, it swept through and fell through on the ground. That's where the chickens fed.
Well, Francis was telling us back when y'all were getting when Granny and Granddaddy would deworm y'all, if you will, and give you them big old peels.
Oh my!
She said that a lot of them peels wound up underneath the house down there in the bungalow,
and made a lot of chickens sick.
Yeah. Oh Lord!
Well, it's the truth. It's the truth.
That's what happened. My next thing I wanted to just kind of tell our listeners about LD and Gardis. What were your recollections? If you could just describe LD a little bit, how would you describe LD, and then we'll do Gardis after.
He was a strict guy, very, very strict.
Authoritarian.
Very demanding. As I said earlier, I think you never asked why.
Yeah.
He told you to do something, you were expected to do it. No questions, just go do it. And if you didn't do a good job, well then the next time you do a good job the first time, because he was a disciplinarian. Yeah. But he had to be raising 4 boys and 4 girls. And on the farm, everything that you got, you came by it kind of in a hard way.
Right.
But he was, he understood what it took to make a living.
Right.
And obviously he was pretty well thought of through the county. This was I think in the 50s that he applied to become a commissioner. And he was won. There was 10 candidates, and he won. And he through his politicking, he'd go around on his little pickup truck, and if a farmer was in the field and he thought that he wasn't plowing his field just right, he'd go out and help him adjust the plows. And he was actually known as the overall man, meaning a pair of coveralls, and that's all he wore. I never saw my dad wear a pair of jeans.
He wore a pair of duck head
overalls. And later on in the years, I would see him at special occasions. He would be in a suit. He could play the piano a little bit, and he could certainly play the guitar, and had a real bass voice, and he could sing.
Yeah. I wish that everybody watching this could have heard him sing back in the day, because he had that low voice.
And later, and during the time to supplement the farm income, he would drive the school bus, and which was very, very little pay. But just this morning, here in 2025, I had a guy said he remembered I remember when your daddy would drive the bus, and said he'd start yodeling. Yeah. And start singing. And he said every kid on there would just be quiet and pay attention.
Listening to him
yodel. He could yodel.
Good, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that now that you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that though.
Yeah.
Well, how about Gardis? I know that she raised me, up to teenage years, and I know what I know about her, but I didn't get to see what y'all got to see.
Yeah, mom, with education limited, not long obviously into her marrying dad, it became her deal was to start having kids, and you needed that to be able to farm, especially the acreage we had. But you would never meet a sweeter person and a more caring person. Again, being a preacher's daughter, she was brought up right. She actually was 5 years old before she ever saw her daddy, because he was sent to prison. Again, I'm speaking of my granddaddy Barnes, which became a pastor after he left prison.
And his name, what was his name?
Jesse Monroe Barnes.
Jesse Monroe.
And they all
Barnes.
knew him as JM. And when he left to go to prison, my grandmama Burge become pregnant with Mama, and he got 4 years. He and his brother broke out, and Papa turned himself back in. They added a year, so that made 5 years. And he walked up into the yard one day, and that's the first time my mom had ever seen her daddy, when she was 5 years old.
Now, speaking of that, what I have been told, and you can help me verify, you said that him and his brother got sent off, and they were over somewhere around other side of Tallahassee, Jacksonville, or somewhere, Florida, and they broke out. But he turned himself in. Is that help me?
There was three of the Barneses up at a little place east of here called Esto, Florida, and it was either a lawyer, I think it was a lawyer that was killed one night. They were having back then it was all about liquor, moonshine liquor. You didn't have a beer, it was liquor. So the deal is that this guy was killed, and there was three Barneses there: Elias, Jesse Monroe, and Joe, and they were all Barneses, and they were brothers. The story is that Elias was the guy one of the Barneses that killed the guy. He left immediately after that. So when all the hoopla got through and everybody was gathered around before the constable came out, the constable is a form of sheriff. Mm-hmm. And the only two Barneses left was Jesse Monroe, my granddaddy, Jesse Monroe, and then Joe. And somebody said, hey, it was one of the Barneses. So the two that got sent off, was actually not the ones that actually killed the guy, but they couldn't beat the route. So they got sent to a place called Rayford, down in South Central Florida. Yeah. And then to about the almost time for them to get out, Joe talked Papa into breaking out, and they, of course, all they had to travel was walking. And so they came to the Swanee River. They swam the Swanee River from the east side, come to the west side, and Papa told Joe, he said, Joe, this ain't right. I'm going to go and I'm turning myself back in. And Joe said, I ain't looking back. So he ended up in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Papa went back, turned himself in, and they added another year, therefore giving him 5 years for something that he really didn't do. And by the way, while he was in prison that last year, he found God. He gave his life to Jesus Christ, and Mama says was as good a preacher later on in the years as he was an alcoholic before he. Yeah, so totally a 180.
She was 5 years old.
5 years old before she ever saw Dad. It scared her to death. She didn't know who he was.
Wow.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah. Well, I remember with Granny. I remember she had like I said, the sweetest thing. But I remember several things, but things that stick out in your mind. Number one is if you guys ever had bread pudding, Granny she cooked bread, biscuits at every meal that was served at her table, whether it was supper, lunch, breakfast. Yeah. She cooked biscuits at every meal. And that whatever biscuits was left over, she would save them, and then she would make a bread pudding that just I just still wish I had it right now to eat it.
Oh yeah.
But I remember that, and I remember another thing about her when she would go to her garden and pick peas or pick butter beans or corn or okra, whatever it was. I remember being with her, and she was dragging me along as her grandson, but like her son, actually. And she had a doggone guinea, a little guinea named Herman. Herman was his name. And that guinea would follow her everywhere she went. And if there was a rattlesnake or a snake or anything in that garden, that guinea would go crazy over that to alert Granny, and that guinea was like her dog.
Oh yeah. Now guinea is a type of chicken fowl. It's just an African descent bird, and unlike a domesticated chicken that you'd see nowadays, in some yards. But Scott was exactly right there. That was her security. Yeah. I well remember the guinea locating a rattlesnake on the row of peas that she was picking. And they just made such a unique sound. It was almost like having a dog as security. And of course, we ended up, finally getting our attention, and we went over and killed the snake. But that guinea was, she'd follow Mom in the house if she'd let her.
Yeah, that was fun. But she had a way with them animals like that. I well remember that.
Sweet lady, you couldn't beat her in her cooking. Obviously, a lot of the folks back then could cook. But it was nothing like we have nowadays, the microwave, 5 minutes, you can cook a complete meal. Everything was done by hand. The flour, that we had came in sacks, cloth sacks, and we had what we called a rolling store.
Rolling store. Yeah.
And it was a vehicle that first 6-wheeler vehicle I ever saw. It had a closed-in body, and he'd have a little bit of everything in there, and he'd go from one farm to the next, and we may need flour, and somebody up the road might not have any eggs, so we'd trade eggs for flour, and then Mom would take those flour sacks and make our shirts.
Make your shirts out of flour
That's
sacks.
what we would. Yeah. I wore them to school on many a day. Yeah.
Like Dolly Parton sings.
Oh yeah.
Coat of many colors.
I'm telling you, I could definitely identify with that. And later on, they started putting colors in the sacks. So I mean, we were like, hey man, we're high class.
And you didn't have a refrigerator, so you had an ice box. And did the rolling store bring ice too?
Rolling store, the ice man would run it, and it would be in blocks of ice. But what I call first ice box I remember is when we were down at our bungalow, and my dad had taken some 2x6s and made a square box. And in those 2x6s, which is lumber, sawn lumber, he would space 2 or 3 rows of that sack to seal that, and thereby it being a box, and that's where our ice was put, and then he'd wrap that block of ice in some sacks, thereby creating ice box. And that's the first ice box I well remember.
Golly.
Yeah.
Golly. Well, I guess the next topic I want to get on is, it's kind of sensitive a little bit. I get jerked up about it a little bit, but since we don't have Marie with us today,
yeah,
and she can't speak for what it is, I wanted to have each of the living brothers and sisters to kind of, because I really didn't get to know Aunt Marie that good. All I remember is when she did get the cancer and passed away. I was old enough to remember that, but I'd have to have you speak kind of through about her. What was Marie like?
If you go back to what my comments about Mom, all my sisters had a lot of Mom's ways, habits. Marie was the third girl and the fourth child in the family, and she was just had a sweet disposition about her. Always smiling, would pull a joke on you in a heartbeat. She'd do anything to get a laugh out of somebody. I well remember when her 2 kids were small. They came up for Christmas, and she played Santa Claus.
Oh Lord!
So we got the gifts all wrapped and under the tree, and she was gonna do Santa Claus, the ho 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 deal, if you will, and then run outside and actually come back in another way as Mom. And so when she did the ho ho ho, she attempted to go out the door, and the door was locked. So she grunted a little bit, but the kids hadn't made it in yet. But stuff like that I remember, and she was just a sweet lady. Loved kids, and the boy she married was from Vernon, a little town south here, about 20 miles. A great guy. I still call him my brother-in-law. He remarried a lady, a sweet lady. They ended up with bringing a boy and a girl to the marriage, both of them. So they ended up with 2 boys and 2 girls. And Larry Hewitt was who she married. His son still comes up, my nephew, and we're here at the cabin, and Larry comes up and does some hunting. But Marie was a sweet girl, well thought of, and nowadays people, when we mention Marie, one of their first comments is, "What a beautiful girl."
Wow.
Yeah, wow. What a beautiful girl. And, again, she had a lot of Mom in her. She was very caring. She cared about other people's feelings a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a great the description of her and all, and I appreciate that. And she passed away in
1976.
1976.
Yeah, they lived in Ocala, and cancer was happening then, but not near as recognized as it is now. And back then, when you were diagnosed with cancer, the medical people would give you about 6 months to live, and that was her extent there of once they realized. They first thought it was a tumor, and then when the doctors started the surgery, well, they realized what it was. So they didn't know what to do. They did it just wasn't happening then like it is now.
Yeah. Well, I wish she was with us today to do this interview, because it would have been a treat. But we definitely recognize her and want all the future folks watching this to know Marie was loved, and she was a loving lady. So the next thing is kind of an open end, and we talked about a lot of stuff. But
I'll ramble a lot if you'll allow me.
We'll get rolling. Is there anything that you would want the folks, years and years, and however many years this is? Again, this is 2025.
Yeah.
This may be going to 2095 right here. I don't know, but I hope it does.
Yeah.
Anything you would want them to know that we hadn't talked about? Anything on your mind that you just would like for future generations to know?
Well, I've touched on it lightly. And my career, I touched the lives, and a lot of people's lives crossed with me. And a lot of the places, once you leave a job, they will do what they call an exit interview. People will sit down with you. What do you want how do you want to be remembered? And I just look them in the face like I'm looking at you and tell them that I was an honest guy. And he said, what else? I said, that's all you need. Honesty, to me, trumps anything else. It starts with yourself. Being honest with yourself. Don't fool yourself. Don't get so fed up in a subject, a project, or whatever, an idealism, an ideology, that you think, well, that's all I want to see. Just be honest. Respect the other person's opinion, their belief. And be honest with yourself, number one. And I've lived that all my life, my professional life. And once I realized, what I said and what I did could affect somebody else, I started framing myself up to think, you know what, if I'm honest with myself, within what I refer to now as the good Lord will keep you focused on that. And people's actions and words can hurt people. True honesty won't let you do that. True honesty will keep you grounded, and it's like, you can have whatever, for instance, you want, but if you start off with honesty and stay that route and end up in honesty, you've done the best that the good Lord asked you to do, I think.
Right. That's right. That's a well put. Well, Tommy, that was all the kind of things I wanted to touch on, but on the phone when I was calling you the other day to say, hey, wouldn't it be a good time to come down and sit down with you? And you said anytime, you'll make time.
Right.
But during that, you said something about Hewlin, my daddy, that you said something about he'd saved your life a couple of times. And I didn't want to let that pass by, because I don't know about it. I wanted to hear it too.
Well, that just tells you how close we still are, even though there's a generation gap here between you and I. Back in the day, as I mentioned earlier in this interview, you had no stock law, so your cows and your hogs could just go anywhere. And people may say, well, how did you know what was yours? Instead of having an iron brand, which you may not even know that later on in the years, to like horses and cows, you would heat an iron, and like us, it might be Circle C, C being for Crews. Well, back then, you marked your hogs by the ears, and it's still recorded in our courthouses today. Your brother saved my life twice. We live right here on the river, basically the river basin anyway. Less than a mile west of here is the Choctawhatchee River. So we were trying to get our hogs out. We had a high water coming, and we had Dad wanted to make sure all us guys. So it was real easy to get 8 or 10 of your little community guys and teenagers and stuff together, and because they had cows running wild too. So just off the riverbank, the water was coming up pretty swift, and I happened to be one of the last ones to try to cross the little slough there that was running pretty fast with current, and I went under, and your dad jumped in and saved me. I was probably 13. Just a young teenager. I thought I was doing pretty good, and all of a sudden the current dragged me under, and your dad, Hewlin, jumped in and pushed me to the bank, and darn me, I didn't learn my lesson. 100 yards later on, we had to cross another slough, and it happened again. And he told me just exactly how to act, but he kind of stayed with me that time. But I probably wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for his reaction that day. And like I said, a lot of the guys, they were older. They learned how to swim at an earlier age. But I remember that. I remember that well. It was just one of those things that I let get away from me, and I almost lost my life. And thanks to him, and I've told him, hey man, I owe you everything. Of course, a brother would do that, but it's like, thank God. And he was the only one out of the bunch that did it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, hey,
hey, sorry.
Yeah, see ya.
We'll see you at the end of the road.
I'm not getting in that swift water, but we kind of had to cross it because back behind us we'd already crossed some sloughs and stuff, as you call them, that and the water was coming up fast. So Hewlin responded real well. Hewlin, your dad's always been good to me. We talked off camera a while ago about the cars that he owned.
Yeah.
He came back from Vietnam, drove an old 1957 Chevrolet from Charleston, South Carolina, down to home here. And my now wife, then girlfriend Linda, we dated on a couple of the cars that he left for me while he was still in service.
And he told me that 1950, I think it was a 57 Chevy car. He said he paid $300 for it in Charleston, and he was coming home on leave from the Air Force. And then while he was on leave, he was here. I think he said he had 9 days on leave, and then he headed to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And he left that car for you in Clifton.
That's right.
And
then Clifton shortly thereafter, he was drafted. Which when they draft you, that means that you're demanded to go. You can't get out of it. And I actually joined later on, but. The four of us boys, Hewlin, Clifton, and myself, and then our baby brother Rick came. He came later on.
Yeah.
And two of us served in Vietnam, which I don't know if history will even talk about it anymore. Down the years, but it was an unnecessary war, political stuff. But I won't go there any further. But we served our country. We took the oath and we served. He was in the Air Force and mine was Army. And we chose to get out and start our careers, in a different area.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well,
but I owe your dad. I owe your dad, and I've told him I'm not hiding it from him.
Yeah.
He and I seem like we're closer. Just for some reason we were closer, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
I guess we thought a lot alike, but he sure saved my life twice that day.
Goodness gracious, there's some times, and I know that there's a lot of other stories that we may redo this again later and add to it, y'all. But right now, this is kind of what we had. But we were talking to Frances a little bit a while ago,
my older sister,
your oldest sister, and we were talking about Gardis and things I remembered about Granny. And it was as I sit here and look, you got the same skin as Granny had.
Yeah, I do.
And Francis has got the same skin, and Hewlin's got the same skin, and we'll see what the others look like. But that skin that she had, I won't ever forget all that. When me and her would be there on a Friday night, because as I told y'all, she raised me, and we'd be there on Friday night, and after she worked, we'd be there on a Friday night, and after she worked all day doing whatever that she had to do on the farm. Then we'd be shelling peas or butter beans or cutting up okra or whatever. Yeah. And me and her, it'd just be me and her, and we'd be watching the Dukes of Hazzard on Friday night. And then it was Dallas that came on after that. And then I forgot the third show that came on right before the 10 o'clock news. And I was telling Frances earlier, I said, Granny'd be over there, and she'd be so tired that her head would drop and she'd start just snoring. And me being young, I'd just punch her. I'd say, wake up, Granny. And she'd pull her head up like that, and she'd say, I ain't asleep. I was just resting my eyes. And I said, you need to go to bed. And she said, I'm just resting my eyes.
Mom worked like a man. She was right there with us kids. Again, everything was done by hand. I've watched her spread fertilizer, dipping it out of a 5-gallon bucket with a table saucer, going down the rows there for the watermelons. She'd stay right there with us kids. I mean, you know, and you know, now, you know, hindsight's 20/20, but yeah, you know, you'd think some of us kids should have said, "Mom, go home. You know, we don't, you know, we'll be all right."
Yeah.
But Dad expected her to be out there, so therefore she was there. And hard-working
Everybody
woman.
worked.
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody
Yeah, that's
worked.
exactly right.
Wasn't no
Yep.
play in there. Well,
Yep.
well, thank you, Tommy, for today. And today is, what is it? It's January the 9th of 2025.
Yeah. We're
And,
down at my little cabin.
We're down here at Tommy's cabin here in the Gritney area, right here, literally 200 yards over there is where the farm was at.
That's exactly
that
right.
I grew up on, and Tommy and Linda have been living here, and then I think they'll probably wind up staying here.
Yep. Yep.
And one of the last few that are actually here at the old homestead.
Yep.
But thank y'all for joining in and watching this, and I hope that it's proved to be some good information, and hopefully you got a little kick and a laugh along the way, and otherwise kind of learning a little bit about how the Crewses grew up down here in the Gritney area. So y'all stay tuned, and we got a couple of more episodes coming this way.